week after week. I'm so grateful for our musos. Thank you, Keith. Thank you. They just help convey a sense of the goodness of God in their expression. They just are amazing. They serve week after week after week. There are hours that go into practice and, rehearsals, that sort of thing. And we are so grateful. We wouldn't look nearly as good without them, would we? We probably wouldn't sound very good either without them. Nothing like a bit of music to cover the wrong note. Well, this morning, I am amazed. I am constantly amazed at how God will choose to partner with us when we attempt to represent Him, and how His choices are often like nothing of our own. Keep an eye on the time. I tend to talk too long. And I'm just constantly in awe. I'm excited in myself because of the time and season we're in. There is such a shift of spiritual atmosphere in our nation. And according to Graham Cook's word, his prophetic word that he brought over our nation, it's only going to increase. These are exciting times to be alive, exciting times to be in the leadership, in the ministry. It's the best years, and it's just going to get better. How many of you actually really believe that? I honestly believe that. I honestly believe it. And just in the last wee while, I picked up a book by Malcolm Gladwell, actually. He's the guy that wrote Tipping Point. And he's written another called David and Goliath. And the Register, I just had a condensed version, and I started reading it. And oh my goodness, did that get me going? And so you're just going to have a bit of the outflow of that this morning. This is a particularly poignant weekend on our nation because it's a celebration of the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, when two cultures decided to put down their arms and work together in unity to bring peace to our land. And yes, it's been a bit fragile in areas, but by and large, it's been such a dramatic shift in our nation. And I want to just celebrate with you, we'll just retell some of the story with you of another occasion like that, where there was a decisive victory that brought a whole change of perspective to a culture group, actually to two culture groups. And I just want to just pick up, and you guys who've been in church, you'll know it probably better than I can preach it, the story of David and Goliath. Judy, could you put up the first, do I need to move this? Perhaps if I move it. Oh, I guess you can see past it. The story of David and Goliath, of course, has been well known. It's been told years and years and years, and no doubt you have heard lots and lots and lots of sermons about David and Goliath, and you understand the principles inside out. And yes, I used to think like that too. But when you actually go in and have a look, it's a little bit different. Now, I'm sorry if that's not very clear. It's a bit difficult knowing how much you can blow things up for an overhead. But however, that could be, the traditional approach. Here's the Israelite army, and they're squared off against the Philistines. Philistines were a seafaring nation that moved into the coast, and then they wanted to move inland. And so they wanted to take a particular valley, the valley of Elah, which was a natural pathway up and down the whole area. And the Israelites, of course, that was their territory, and they were under King Saul. So the Israelites gathered together on the northern ridges, that's all you lot. And the Philistines squared off on the southern ridges, and in the middle was a ravine. Now it all looks very good, but actually for one person, for an army to go down the ravine and go up to the next, to meet the opposing army, was just suicide. And no one was prepared to do it. And eventually the Philistines came to an understanding where they talked about the fight of champions, and this was not actually an Israeli fighting strategy. So for them it could have been completely new, where they said, how about you send out your best fighter to fight with ours? And they put up Goliath. Now you look at this, you can see that Goliath is well covered in armour. In fact, it's bronze. Bronze was being able to be worked in those days, joined together. His armour covers, it's like a big tunic. He's got a helmet, a bronze helmet on. He's got a sword, a javelin, and a spear. And he's also got another guy, the armour bearer, who's actually incidentally behind him. Everything about this picture is completely wrong. But it's actually the kind of picture that most of us who've been brought up in church have been led to believe this is what it was like. But actually, in reality, it was nothing like that. Let's have a look at the second slide, please, Judy. This is what Goliath's army looked like, his armour looked like. It was a coat of brass, and it would have weighed about 56 kilograms. That's quite substantial. Is anyone here weigh 56 kilograms? Wow, there we are. It would be a Quinta picking up Anne and waving her around. That's just a tunic. Then you add onto it a helmet, which would probably be about another 7 Ks, because it was quite, not like the Greek one coming down the middle of the nose, but it was like a big skull cap. So there'd be a fair bit of weight in that. Then those of you might remember you had this huge spear. The size of it would have been about 5 centimetres across in diameter. It's very hard when you read scripture and you see all those kind of conversions of weights and measures that are not familiar to us. Experts disagree as to how big he was, but some would say he's up to about 9 or 10 feet, which would have been very difficult if that's true. Others would say it's probably more about 7 feet, but either way, he's pretty huge, towers over everybody else, and he's well developed, he's well trained in warfare, and he's armed and he's dangerous. And he comes out every day for 40 days. Timing is impeccable. He comes out just before the Israelites do their morning and evening prayers. They called it the Shema, where every morning they would start off, "Blessed be the Lord our God, who is our God, who is one God." And they'd finish off those prayers. It's a set of 3 prayers found in Deuteronomy and Numbers about how he is our God, he has chosen us, he will lead us. Before they get into that, out comes Goliath. Impeccable timing. Throwing scorn and taunting. And talk about sledging. He's taking it to a fine new level. He takes it right up there. And of course the Israelites are somewhat, what? Fight that giant? I mean, I don't think I would be wanting to race to fight him. And so they're kind of withdrawn in fear. And of course that's what the enemy does. He likes to intimidate. That's his primary weapon against us as sons and daughters of the living God. He wants to cause us to be fearful, to intimidate us. And once a foe is intimidated, actually you're halfway there through the battle. And that's his primary thing. I mean, why does he do that? Because it's cheap. One person can intimidate a whole army. That's great resource control for an enemy. And that's what the enemy does. He will intimidate. So Goliath is throwing at his taunts, and they're increasing by the day. And he brings out trophies. He's saying, okay, put up your man against me. Now Saul hears that. Now Saul, remember, is head and shoulders above everybody else. And at one time, Saul was a mighty man of war. But then the Spirit of the Lord left him, and he's no longer that confident and bold man that he used to be. And so he's thinking, flip, they're all thinking that I should be fighting this man. He didn't want to. And everybody's scattering with fear, and there's a sense that it just gets right. You know how fear is contagious? It's contagious. You sit waiting in a dentist waiting room and see if you don't pick it. It's contagious. It just gets amongst people. And it was being caught. And no doubt he was aware of other people looking at him and thinking, come on, Saul, you're meant to be the leader. Why aren't you doing your bit? But he was terrified. And he had every reason to be so. And as the sledging increases, day by day, Goliath is boasting. He was the one that took out the sons of Eli. He was the one that captured the ark. He was the one that took the ark to the temple of Dagon, and he was the one that's been used by the Philistines to annihilate all their enemies, all their previous enemies. And actually, this motley lot up on the hill haven't got a chance. Another thing is they don't have any decent weapons, simply because, excuse me, the Israelites had no access to the smelting of iron, and so all their weapons were inferior. And so they were full of themselves. They were so confident, come on, and his sledging just increased day by day. Enter David, young David, who of course had been an armor bearer for the king, was familiar with warfare, but however was obviously at the time looking after his father's sheep. His father said to him, can you take some cheese and bread, take some pizzas to your brother, your 3 brothers who are in the army, find out how they're doing, what's happening. He arrives at the time Goliath's getting up and taunting, and his taunts are getting more and more vitriolic. And I can imagine in a still evening, Goliath's voice, huge man that he was, would have travelled all up and down the valley. No megaphones in those days, but the size of his lungs, he probably didn't need one. And so I can imagine it would just roll around, and just the whole enemy would become discouraged and full of fear. And I can imagine that's exactly, he showed up in all his regalia, which of course was what he meant to do, to intimidate. By appearances, intimidate. David hears this taunt. He's so incensed. How dare that man defy the armies of the living God? How dare he? What is he? Why are you guys doing something about it? His older brother Eliab goes, who are you? What are you doing here? You don't know a thing. Why aren't you back at home looking after those few sheep? I know your motives. You just want to see some bloodshed so you can take back those stories. And so he's putting motivation on David. That's not David's heart at all. David's going, what is the matter with you? I just asked a question. And so he goes around. Saul hears about David. David says, I can take him out. Saul hears. He invites him. He calls for him to come. He takes him, and David says, don't be afraid. I can do it. I can do it. Saul says, you can't. You're just but a youth. You can't do this. He's been, ever since you've been alive, he's been a warrior. He's seasoned. He knows what he's doing. You don't even have the training. You can't do this. David said, I can do it. So Saul thinks, well, he's the only one that's offering, and Saul's offered bribes like his daughter for a hand in marriage. How would you like to be that daughter? I wonder if anyone's ever thought, yeah. Anyway, let's not go there. And he's, so I thought, well, he's the only one that's offering. Okay, he's not unintelligent. So he said, let's give this boy a fighting chance, gives him his own armor. Now, David could not have been a boy for Saul to be offering him his armor. Think about it. He wouldn't fit. You wouldn't put a king's armor, who was head and shoulders above everybody else, on a kid. Obviously, it's not going to fit. So David was fully grown. David puts it on, walks around and says, I can't wear this. I'm not trained for it. It's not me. This has been made for you, but not for me. I cannot wear this. Was David but a child? No, he was fully grown. And so Saul goes, well, good luck. I'm sure he probably didn't use quite those terms, but I bet they thought it. And they watched him go out, and Goliath could hardly see David coming. There is some possibility he had impaired sight. And then when he heard that David was coming, he saw a boy, and he said, am I but a dog that you would come at me with sticks and stones? Actually, if you read that, the word is kind of, because of the translation, it's actually worse than a dog. It refers to a male homosexual prostitute. The sledging was getting worse and worse. Wow, and then David comes right back. I love that. It's just a huge confidence. He says, you come at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin in battle, and you've got another one with you. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you mock and curse. This very day, God is going to hand you over to me, and I'm going to kill you, I'm going to cut off your head, and I'm going to serve up your body and the bodies of your mates to the field for the crows and the coyotes. The whole earth will know that there is a God, an extraordinary God in Israel. And everybody gathered here, Philistines, Israelites here, will know that God doesn't deliver by means of a sword or a spear. The battle belongs to the Lord. So he just tosses it right back up, which of course incensed Goliath, and so he comes roaring towards, trying to run with his 85-kilogram lot of armour on. Imagine it. He'd be a great big lumbering giant trying to shift. David grabs his sling, and we all know, swings it around, hits Goliath, he falls over dead. Have you ever wondered why did Goliath go face front? Why didn't he go backwards? Maybe you haven't. Well, it's very interesting. If Goliath took the ark into the temple of Dagon, and after 3 days, the Dagon god fell on his face in front of the ark. And Goliath had an image of Dagon on his chest. He had it engraved into his chest. He too followed the God he served. Isn't that interesting? Well, a lot of people, and how it's taught, would tend to think that, oh, can we just flick up the next one? Yeah. Sorry. I'm coming. I am coming back. That was Goliath's sword, one of the trophies, again to intimidate. From a previous battle, a sword used by Canaanites with deadly efficiency. And that's probably why, again, he's showing his trophies to intimidate. Okay, so just looking, next one please, Judy. Just looking at that whole thing. Is it really a lopsided battle? I don't know how many of you watched the television program, The Mythbusters. And always in there is some form of explosion or something. But they go in and actually look at all the myths and go, is this right? Is this really true? Is this very accurate? I love that photo. That's a good photo, isn't it? And many people would think, yep, that's David and Goliath, this little wee puny boy against this great big massive giant. So let's have a really good look at the Mythbusters and actually see how real it really was. I'll put that down there because we need to have something to explode. Okay, so it's, how many of you think we're going to bust the myth this morning? Some of you are not too sure. Are you sure? Are we preaching heresy here? Well, there we are. Okay, I'm just trying to find my notes here, and I've completely lost it. Okay, in those days, the warfare was a little bit different from the warfare that we've known. There was the cavalry that went in. The cavalry were like the chariots, the horses, the spears, the javelins. The ones that cavalry were, that say, here comes the cavalry, means it's reinforced, it's coming. So they're the ones with the chariots, with lots of protection. Then there was the infantry. They're the foot soldiers who came along in arm-to-arm combat. And they fought fiercely and, hopefully had some armour on, but not always. And then there was the artillery. What was the artillery like in those days? Well, it was your archers. But also, and battles were won and lost on this alone, there were the slingers. The slingers, the people were slingshots, like David. They were the singers, and they were the ones who often their actions often determined the course of the war, whether it be successful or not. The slingers would try to aim for the leaders of the whole army. They would try to take them out. How many of you know you take out your leader, you get most of the army? And because they had the ability to throw their weapon or their stones a long way across, They could actually throw it up to 430 metres. They're that good. Judy, can you just throw up the next slide, please? Okay, here we are. Common sight in Israel in those times. The boys are slingers. And they first developed them, they first got into throwing stones like that. The shepherds first developed it because they wanted to keep the predators at bay. What better way? Throw a stone. Actually became akin to firing a pistol. Because the velocity of that spin, you could get up, a stone could travel over 400 k's a second. It's unbelievable. Yeah, for a distance of 430 metres. It's amazing. It's phenomenal. Now that's an experienced slinger. Deadly, deadly in the right hands, absolutely deadly. And how do boys skill up? With their stone. I mean, the ammunition is right at your feet. No, you don't have to carry it with you. It's light. A sling is light. And you know, you break it, you just make another. It's so easy. But for David in the back paddock, he perfected the art of slinging, and it worked towards him. The next one, this is actually what a sling looks like. As you can see, it's a braided rope. Now, lengths vary. A long one will get a lot further than a short one. And the rope is actually braided because if it twists, it doesn't warp. Okay? And so the stone, next one please, Judy. The stone is placed in that leather pouch. Now, and also the next one. Oh, we seem to have missed one. Okay, no, there was one where they held. Okay, at the end, the little pouch at the end of one of them had a little loop on it that you would put around your little finger, your middle finger. Okay, and the other one didn't have the loop. So you would put that loop around the middle finger, and then you would just fire it up, and let the other bit go, and it would just fling. Judy, if you wouldn't mind just putting the next one up. Okay, stones or sling bullets, they would vary in size from half a K to just little wee pebbles. And if they are kind of smooth, with no rough edges, and they are much more accurate and can go much further. And so they had lots of ones that they'd pull out of the river, and also they made some, you know, they would actually finally make them because they were like marbles, they were absolutely deadly. Now, if you happen to be on the receiving end of one of those, yes, it will penetrate right through leather armour. Yes, it will. And if it's perhaps a bit further back and it doesn't have the same kind of hit you with the same intensity, it can cause like big bruising inside, which actually can kill people. They were deadly. And the advantage is that you can fire down, you can fire up, you just pick up the ammunition at your feet, and it's just easily transported in your pocket. And so it was a brilliant weapon. Now you look at that compared to Goliath. Now Goliath expected to have a battle hand to hand, face to face. That's what he expected. He was prepared for that. He had all the armour on, and you know, although he could probably, I mean, he must have been big to be able to carry about 85 k's of armour on, but he was expecting that. And as for David, he wasn't going to do that because he wasn't trained in that warfare. And so David, of course, next one please, Judy. Oh yeah, that's how it's held. I must have put that in the wrong place. Sorry, you can see that wee loop that goes through the middle finger. This is how they do it. It's not kind of overarm like cricket. It's just, and you don't have to go round and round and wind up because that's just a waste of energy. One simple round circuit and release it at the right time, and it can be deadly. Now, when you look at it, you think, well, yes, that's very accurate, but how effective is it? How accurate is it? Sorry, that's very effective, but actually, how effective is it? Let me give you some details here. In Numbers, I think it is. Oops, I cannot find it. Judges. It talks about Benjamin. In the tribe of Benjamin, there were 700 slingers, they called them, who could fire one with their left arm to the level, and the accuracy is to the level of a hair's breadth. It's amazing. They could hit coins that they could barely see. They could take birds down in mid-flight. And target practice for them when they first started off would be 200 metres down. Okay, see if you can hit it. They were deadly accurate. They were phenomenal. And as I said before, battles were won or lost depending on the accuracy of the slinger. Well, of course, out comes Goliath, expecting to have hand-to-hand combat. Out comes David, and he's so angry for the honour of God. It's not about for the honour for him, it's for the honour of God. And he's firing back on all cylinders. And so then he lets David, and the Goliath starts running towards, and David runs towards him. He doesn't go, God, don't I? He doesn't get on his knees and pray, God, is it right for me to be doing this? No, he's a man of action. He took the word of God and he believed it. God, you can defend us against this enemy. And he ran towards him. And he, as we know, he threw his stone and hit him right on the forehead. Remember, they'll penetrate through armour. It penetrated one there, right through. And whether it knocked him out or laid him out cold, I don't know. But he was flat on his face. David raced up, grabbed his sword, that big curved sickle sword they called them, and cut his head off. He couldn't have been that young to cut his head off. Seriously? He wasn't a boy. He wasn't a boy. And so, of course, everybody celebrated, and the whole enemy scattered. The Philistine army scattered. So much for keeping to their covenant. Yeah, if you win, we will serve you. What? They took off. For them, it was a battle of the gods. You know, if the Philistines won, their God was supreme. If the Israelites won, the Israelite God was supreme. And for them, they had lost. So they were acknowledging, actually, the Israelite God was supreme. And so they ran because they couldn't believe it. You know, you look at the disadvantages, and I'm sure as David went before Saul, he would have looked at that. At David, he said, you're a youth. Yep, maybe fully grown, but a youth. And he hadn't got any armour that fits. Yes, he offered him his own armour, but it wasn't right for him. It wasn't made for him. And yes, he wasn't trained in formal warfare. Really good reasons to support the traditional view. But if you compare that to the reality of the truth, slingers were far more powerful. David needed his mobility to sling his bullet. And he wasn't encumbered. What were the advantages for David? Yes, his youth. He wasn't trained in the formal warfare of the times. He knew about it. He was Saul's armor bearer, but he had gone through the formal training. He hadn't gone through the sausage machine, which turns everybody else out like a clone. He thought differently because of it. And yes, he was young, he was strong. He had the strength of youth on his side. And yes, he had no armor, but he had mobility and agility on his side. And so, completely caught Goliath unawares. Now, if you're going to compare infantry versus artillery, artillery will win hands down. Okay, you put a chariot amongst a field of soldiers fighting, the chariot trumps. It's like rock, paper, scissors. Chariots trump in that situation. But however, you put a man trained for hand-to-hand combat with another man with a sling shot, artillery trumps every time. Goliath was a sitting duck. He had no chance against a stone that was probably travelling so fast he couldn't see it. And he certainly couldn't defend himself. Goliath had no chance. He actually had no chance. And all David's disadvantages, youth, no armour, no experience, they all worked for him because he had a different mindset, a different way of seeing things and a different way of doing things. And he trumped Goliath just like that. Goliath didn't have a chance against David, and Goliath had no idea. David races up, cuts off his head, lifts it up, and everybody celebrates. I want to just say to you, some of our Goliaths that we face in present day are Goliaths of our own family. The first one that David faced was Eliab. Now actually, we need to bust this. Come on, Dave. Would you like to do this? Yep. Do you want to stand on it? Where's the sling? I do. Okay, how are you going to burst it, or do you want this? I don't know. You can give it a go. Be like, what? No. Here we are. Yeah. Come on, David is. Is it, come on, David is. Plop it on. Woo! We had to blow something up if you're busting myths. The first Goliath that David faced was his own brother, who just accused him of being in it for his own means. And sometimes our family can be the hardest things that we face, because our family know us well. They're the ones that know the buttons to push. They're the ones that know how to needle us and get to us. But the big one that David faced with Goliath, there's something very interesting about Goliath. Do you remember his great-grandmother, Ruth, who followed Naomi back to Bethlehem, back to the house of bread? Ophrah, the woman, the sister-in-law that didn't go with Naomi, was actually Goliath's great-great-grandmother. Isn't that amazing? Ophrah went back and just lived a bit of a degenerate life, had four giants, and actually Goliath came from that line. Amazing, isn't it? And sometimes there are doors opened in our generations that actually flavour the whole family. There are doors opened that can cause us to think and see things in a certain way which will hold us back. And for some of us, we'll never be able to rise up and face Goliaths in our life simply because of the influence that is on our family line. It could be the influence of alcoholism, of financial ruin, of just a sense of being passive, being never able to achieve, and never able to climb up out of the pit, never being able to do anything different. It could be a giant of always not being good enough, always missing out, and never having good breaks. It could be a giant of lack of education, of never having employment opportunities, or being able to perhaps attain study to be able to further. There are many Goliaths that we can be facing. And I want to just say to you, one of the primary advantages that David had, yes, the fact that he had no tunic was an advantage. Yes, the fact that he was young was an advantage as well as a disadvantage. Notice he turned his disadvantages into advantages. And that's what God does for us if we let him. He turns your disadvantages to your greatest advantage from his perspective. Yes, he was young. Yes, he had no formal training. But he also had one more thing that Goliath didn't realize. He had a word from God. He had a word from Samuel, the prophet Samuel, who had anointed him previously and said, one day, you will be king. And he had a word from the Lord that he was going to be king. He looked at Goliath and thought, well, Goliath, it sucks to be you, because I can't fail because I've got the word of the Lord. And that's probably what gave him the greatest confidence and boldness. He had a word from the Lord and he was hanging on to it. You know, just in this last year, forgive me for harking on about this, but it's so powerful. A word for the Lord for our nation. In it, Graham Cook details amazing, phenomenal rise and spiritual release that is going to come upon our nation. We have a word from the Lord. Yes, it might not be an individual, but it's a corporate word. And I just sense prophetically this morning, there is such a need for Davids and Davidesses to rise up, taking their word and go, I'm going to take that. I'm not going to settle for what I've always known. I'm not going to settle always being second rate. I'm not going to settle for always feeling insecure and like I can never achieve. I am not going to settle for second best. And there is a real call in the spirit realm. I sense it even as I'm saying this, for people to rise up in their destiny and in their calling and in their inheritance, because we are called to reign. We are called to rule. We are not called to cower out in the back paddock. We are called to reign and rule. And there's a call, there's such a call spiritually of people to rise up, to take the word that you've been given and rise up in the calling and the destiny that God has placed on you. I wonder if the musos would mind coming, please. These are the best years. But they're not going to happen as quickly as we'd like it to if we all sit thinking, well, I wonder when is God's going to do this? What has God got for you to do? What giants do you have to conquer? Because believe me, we've all got them. We've all got them in one way or another. Yes, it could be family. Yes, it could be, a depression. It could be financial situation. Doesn't mean we've all got giants. But we all had the capacity to rise up in our calling and our destiny and take those giants out. Every one of us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive at this time. That's why you're alive at this time. Because of what you carry and what you have within you. And half the time we've got no idea what God has placed within us. Ecclesiastes talks about the race is not always to the swift or the battle to the strongest, but time and providence, I take them all. Don't look at what you are facing. Don't be intimidated by it. Don't go, this is too hard, I can't do it. We sang before, hope arising. Don't look what you see with your outside eye. Look, God doesn't look at the outside, he looks at the inside. And ask God to show you what's on the inside. You'll get a completely different perspective. It'll go, oh, is that all? What am I scared of? We just have a completely different perspective. Don't look at what you see. Everybody else did that and they were got it completely wrong. Goliath, yes, he was amazing, huge man. Doesn't matter whether he was 9 foot or 7 foot. He was massive. And so often we allow what we see with our natural eyes and it forms what you think. And I'm inviting you, ask God, how do you see this situation? What do you want me to know about this? He is so incredibly amazing. He's for you. He's for you. Can you imagine him cheering on David? Can you imagine up around heaven when David goes out, the cheer that would go around in the heavenly ranks, and everybody's cheering him on. The heavenly hosts around him, they'd all be cheering on because they knew what would happen. And so it's the same with us. God is cheering us on. You could do this. Your advantages actually work out to be your greatest advantage. That's how God works. How does it? I could tell you story after story, but not for this time, because I'll be getting the look any moment now, of how God changes things. And the things that you thought would take you out actually become your ace card. David had a packet, he had aces all up his sleeve, and Goliath didn't even see it. This is a time of new beginnings, of different things happening, the likes of what we've never seen. And yes, if you're growing up in the church, our mindsets can be so formed we don't see what God's doing until it's right under our very eyes. But I want to encourage you, don't allow that in your own life to be so formed. God, this is how I have to do it. This is a pathway to leadership. This is that God's going to stir up different people, and there's going to be astonishing strategies released for our nation. And it's not going to come from the expected ones. May not come from the ones that have been through all the colleges. May not come from the ones who've been through the training institutions. It's going to be unexpected discoveries, unexpected strategies, things that you just didn't see that happening. It's going to come. It's going to happen in our nation, and we're all a part of that. These are exciting times. I'm jealous for you. I don't want you to miss out. Honestly, I don't want you to miss out on anything, because God is the best, and I so want you to have everything that He's had, that you too could have the arm of a victor like David. You too could be anointed with power and authority, reigning in the realm that God has ordained for you. That you too would have that victory cry on your lips, because you know how wonderful God is for you. As I spoke before about generational mindsets, I'm very aware. Now, I've come from a long line of alcoholism. And, and that's still continuing in different ways, in different forms. But I don't want that in my life. And I'm just going to provide an opportunity, if you'd like, to identify in your life things that can be coming down through family influences. Could be just ways of seeing things, ways of doing things. We've always done that. That's us. That's how we respond. We will always react towards that. We always hate those kind of people. That's garbage. That's not our identity. And so if you would like the opportunity to just, let's break that off once and for all. I don't want that carrying on, just for your sake and your kids' sake. Because if you break it at your level, it stops at that point. And so maybe just as I'm speaking, you've identified some areas that is part of your life, and maybe you'd be quite happy to do that. I wonder, as we stand, and I'm just going to lead you through in a prayer. If you'd like to join with that, there's no pressure from you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray a prayer, and at one point I will clap. I need someone to hold this for me. So don't be surprised, but this is actually really based on scientific fact. It does work, okay? I'm not being religious here. It really does work. And so the way forward with particularly generational stuff is we forgive those who first opened the door to this influence in your family line. Now for me, I haven't got a clue. So it doesn't matter. I just go, Father, I forgive whoever it was that opened the door to this influence in my family line. Are you up for that? Okay. Father, I forgive that person who first opened the door to the influence in my family line. And I place your blood, Jesus, between them and my grandparents and my parents, and my parents and me. And I sever the impact of my life now. Clap. Big loud clap. Yeah, hang on a minute. Okay, now that sounded pretty pathetic clap to me. Can we just do a real good one? Good loud clap. Yeah, that's great. Now some of you have never known what it is like to feel loved and appreciated because you've never grown up with it. And if you've never had it, you don't know. And I just want to again just provide the opportunity. If you want to join with me, there's no pressure. But I believe this is incredibly significant. This is actually based on scientific fact. And so if you want to just put your hand on the back of your head, just there, where your neck, just above where your neck meets your skull. And I'll just pray for you and I will clap at one point. Okay, so you don't need to follow this. And I'm just going to go, Holy Spirit, I ask that you will sever all those mindsets that have been established in their thinking right from an early age, the family mindsets. And I ask that you will edit out that which is not of you, and that you would replace it with the mind of Christ, that the abnormal is replaced with the normal mind of Christ. Amen. Thanks, Dave. Now that may seem stupid, but it is actually based on scientific fact. It really does work. God bless you. Now, just want to create the opportunity. If anyone would like prayer now for any specific thing or prayer for healing, we believe in a God who heals. We believe God brings healing and wholeness, and it's not just physical, it's mental and emotional. We believe God brings healing. If you want the opportunity for that, we'd love to pray for you. If you would like, if you don't know Jesus, you kind of meet him. He's so awesome. And if you'd like the opportunity of doing that, we'd just like to create that opportunity for you now as Mel leads us in our final song.